This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
Earlier, way back in 1836, when Charles Darwin was exploring the American continent, this is what he said. It is impossible to reflect on the state of the American continent without astonishment. Formerly, it must have swarmed with great monsters. Now we find mere pygmies compared with the antecedent allied races. And I think we'll do a few images here to help stimulate an appreciation of the nature of some of these beasts. Here we have a really interesting graphic. So on the left, we have a modern elephant jaw, and on the right, we have a mastodon jaw. So these mastodon remains were being found all over non-glaciated North America, particularly on the east side, in the Mississippi Valley and in the southeast. Mastodons were quite prolific. Bradley and I visited the so-called Big Bone Lick on the border of Kentucky and Ohio, maybe a decade ago? 15 years ago?
Closer to 15 now, yeah, man.
Yeah, years go by so quick, I lose track. But this was a mastodon, a mass death site of mastodons. And it goes back in history because it was discovered by early explorers. And in fact, a number of the specimens that were found there along this swampy creek side were sent to Thomas Jefferson, who had a collection in one of the rooms in the White House of these great extinct animals. When they first found these bones, they didn't know what they were looking at. When they looked at this jaw, they found these teeth here. Now, mastodons are browsers, which means that they're eating tree branches. So they have really big, powerful jaws, and their molars are, as you see here. Well, when they found these jaws, of course, what they're thinking is that, my God, we found the jawbone of a monster. And it was assumed that it was probably a carnivorous beast, just because of the nature of the molars in there. But you can see it. Compare the molars of the mastodon over here to the molars of the modern elephant, and you can see how they might have been pretty nervous about.
Yeah, those are.
Is this the and see when Lewis and Clark went out on their expedition. Thomas Jefferson sent a secret message to Clark, I believe it was. I don't remember which one. Saying that if you encountered, and since they didn't know what it was, they called it the American Incognitum. If you find one living in the Western wilderness, try to capture it and bring it back.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think Jefferson was thinking it would be a nice addition to the grounds there at the White House to have a mastodon grazing. No, they literally didn't know if it was a carnivore or an herbivore. They didn't know. Of course, and it's an herbivore. It's like all proboscideans and elephants. It eats plant matter. But yeah,
I was just going to say he had quite a fossil collection already, so he was definitely interested and knew about the stories of these great skeletons that have been found and bone finds. So he's like, yeah, bring that back to me.
Yeah, and I wish that we had a president today that had a collection of extinct animal bones in the White House.
That'd be great.
And if I ever am elected president, I promise that I will dedicate one room of the White House to
Randall Carlson
to extinct megafaunal remains. Okay, so there we have the great American Incognitum, a mastodon skeleton unearthed by Charles Willson Peale in 1801 in the Hudson Valley.
Still looks like a monster.
Yeah, now imagine that and look at the skull. See, when you find the skulls of these extinct proboscideans, this was one of the things that led to legends of Cyclops, that there was a single big eye right in the forehead.
Sure.
Now, can you imagine you're hiking merrily along, along the trail, and you're up in, so this is just going to be north of New York City. You're hiking along, and all of a sudden you come around the bend, and you come face to face with this guy.
Yeah.
Our ancestors did. That's the point. Our ancestors did.
Run away, run away.
How do you know that's not actually a cyclops skull stuck on that elephant skeleton?
Well, I mean,
somebody messed that up.
all right. And here's another one.
And
So
that was probably
Let's see.
14 feet high, 12, 14, does it say? Yeah.
The guy sweeping back there.
Yeah. Well,
Crazy
mastodons are, well, never mind. So here's a skeleton, and just for the sake of scale, I put an old picture in there at the appropriate scale.
All right.
Circa 1998.
Yeah, that was about 1998. Okay.
Is that the same skeleton as the previous picture?
No, this is a different. This is the Warren mastodon. It was found. Where was he found? In Ohio, I think. And here's kind of a reconstruction of what one of them would have looked like. This is a mastodon found in New York State. Obviously, this, like I said, this is a reconstruction. But, actually, he looks a lot. All I'd have to do is add a couple of tusks to one of my dogs, and he'd look like that. But, yeah, there you go. So think about that. This guy was very prevalent in North America during the Ice Age. And here's another Mammoth americanum, the American mastodon, existed from about 5 million years before present to about 12,000. And the painting here, one of my favorite books, and I think it's still available. I'll pull it out here with art. Zdeněk Burian, who is one of my favorite artists of extinct animals. I'll show the book after a minute here when we stop the screen share. But we'll keep going. Let's see. I put a figure in here so you can kind of get a sense of the scale here.
Oh, yeah.
Lunch.
Lunch.
All right. Let's keep going here. Yes, Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, existed from approximately 2 million years before present. I'm putting down 12,000 years before present only because I made this probably 15 years ago. I put this together, or even longer than that. And so at that time, the onset of the Younger-Dryas had not been precisely dated to 12,000, slightly less than 12,900. But it's very possible that the extinction did come through several waves. But again, most of the evidence seems to suggest that Younger-Dryas boundary marks the cap where most of the megafaunal species that disappeared did so at that point. This is Charles R. Knight, who did paintings for the American Museum of Natural History, and he is one of the considered great artists of extinct animals, including dinosaurs. And he did several books. I had a book illustrated by him as a kid that really served to stimulate an interest in all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, Charles R. Knight. And I'm sure anybody, if you could look him up online, you'll find out a lot of information about him and hopefully some high-res reproductions of some of his paintings. So this was the Homotherium, which was a sort of a cheetah-like animal that went extinct. The Megaloceros, the giant Irish elk, and notice the dire wolves. So this guy here, let's see, I think I put Brad in there for scale. Yes.
Wow.
Ugh.
You can see how impressive that beast. And you can see from this, you probably would not want to have a pack of dire wolves on your tail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, it's been a number of paleontologists that I've read, I can't think of off the top of my head who, because this was many years ago, were speculating that one reason, for example, that the American mountain lion is scared of dogs might be some kind of genetic memory of dire wolves. Yeah. Because even a little 40-pound mutt can tree a mountain lion. And you're going, wait a second, come on.
But if I would have gotten the video, it would have been worth it.
It would have been. It would have been.
I don't know. That would have been worth it.
For posterity.
I'm wondering if there's a connection between dire wolves and legends about dire wolves and werewolves. Lycanthropy. I don't know. I don't know that, but
there is, probably won't go into that. Interesting. What? There are just interesting wolf legends of not werewolves, but giant dark dogs as well. In Europe.
Yeah, devil dogs and things. Yeah. Yes. Look at these guys.
Right. That would be terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be terrifying to have what was the movie that came out with Liam Neeson here a year or two ago where they were crash?
The Gray.
The Gray, right. Anybody see that?
Yeah, that was a
tense
movie. Yeah. Yes, very tense movie. I mean, you wind up putting yourself in the shoes of these characters who are these guys who survive a plane wreck and then are chased across the frozen north by
Alaska. I think they're in Alaska, probably.
Yeah, they're chased across the tundra and then through the woods by a pack of wolves that are essentially hurting these guys, and they don't realize it. The wolves are hurting them.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
This is Panthera atrox, the American Pleistocene lion, and you'll notice he's just killed a horse, and the lion is as big as the horse.
Oh, God.
Yeah, let's see, who have I got here? Okay, so there's a human to scale.
Man. Yeah,
So you start to understand why an island out in the middle of the Atlantic would be a good place to set up your society.
There aren't horse-sized giant cats.
Yeah.
That would like to eat you for lunch.
That's right.
See, as we go through this, you begin to realize that, humans during the late Pleistocene, when they got up in the morning, their priorities were a lot different than many of us today, who's wake up in the morning and our most important goal for the day is to not be eaten.
Yeah.
That would be a whole different mindset. Mammothus trogontherii. This was, I think this was the largest of the mammoths. Yeah, there we go. I put a little figure in here. You can see how big these guys were.
God.
They were huge. Up to 16 feet tall at the shoulder.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It is. And just some various art that I found. I don't know who painted this. Oh, yes. And then here, this was at Hot Springs, South Dakota. This was the Mammothus imperator, the Imperial Mammoth, which was another really big mammoth. And that's Graham Hancock there next to. So this was basically a life-size mock-up of Mammothus imperator.
Wow.
So we've seen 4 species. Then there's woolly mammoths. So you've got 4 different species of mammoths, or proboscideans. Proboscideans means the long proboscis, right? 4 species of proboscideans in North America. How many of you got in Africa today? 1. How many of you got in India? 1. So you got two distinct species of proboscideans alive today. Yet there was 4 in North America during the Ice Age. Now here's
0 today.
Yeah, versus 0 today. So here's your diagram of a grizzly bear skull, and I can imagine you wouldn't want a grizzly bear a mad grizzly bear after you.
So it's pretty big.
But the cave bear is this guy.
Oh, man.
Ursus spalaeus, the giant cave bear. So you can see when Darwin is talking about North America swarming with these giant monsters, because they're finding this stuff, you see, and they're going and they're attempting to understand this.
Short-faced cave bear, is that what that is?
No, that's Arctodus simus. This is Ursus spalius, which is the giant Ursus spalius, as in caves. Ursus bear, so it's the giant cave bear. And there's a way you can distinguish between Ursus spalius and Arctodus simus. I'll show you a slide in a minute, which is the easiest way to differentiate between the two different bear species. So here's the comparison of the modern grizzly skeleton with that of Ursus spalius, the giant cave bear. So so then here's Charles. Okay, so here's Ursus spalius, giant cave bear. Also became extinct, at that same Younger-Dryas boundary. And I'll put, there's Brad in there for scale. You got to hand it to Brad. That guy has a lot of nerve.
Yeah.
And so here's Charles R. Knight's version of the giant cave bear. I'll show you I'll show you an image here of Arctodus simus, which is the giant short-faced bear, in a second. Generally, the way you can easily and quickly, even the layman can quickly distinguish between Ursus spalius and Arctodus simus is the cave bear usually is seen carrying a club. And that's usually the simplest way. And oftentimes the hat is a giveaway.
Rare bear.
Okay, so here's Mammoth primigenius, the woolly mammoth, sort of icon of the Ice Age, went extinct at the Pleistocene Holocene boundary. And again, this is Z and X artwork here. And again, Mammothus imperator. This was the really big one, 16 foot tall at the shoulder. And here's when we were up hiking one day, we came across this femur of a mammoth. What?
It was just standing there,
sticking out of the ground like that.
Well, no, Brad had just set it up on end and had carefully balanced it just for the picture. Yeah. No, but this is actual to scale. So this is the thigh bone of a mammoth to scale.
Wow.
I better see. I'm not sure what's ahead of here. I better take a look. Okay, so. Okay. All right. Elasmotherium Sibericum. This was one of the giant woolly rhinos of Siberia. And let's see who put my brother Rowan in there for scale. Now that would be a pretty impressive beast, you got to admit.
Yep.
And then Coelodonta, the woolly rhinoceros. This was a North American animal. You found them quite prevalent up in non-glaciated Yukon and Alaska. I don't think they were found down in the southern part of the U.S. And Smilodon stalking a Shasta ground sloth. So that was one of the at least 4 species of ground sloth. The bison latifrons, or the super bison, and put a person in there for scale. Their horns could actually reach up to 10 or 12 feet for the really big ones for a span.
Man.
So this particular beast was like double the size or mass of the modern American bison. And I don't know how many of you have ever encountered close up modern American bison, but they're a pretty impressive animal.
Yeah. We have a bunch of them around us. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
I'd like to make me a drinking horn out of one of those.
Hey, yeah. Well, listen, man, I want a helmet with bison latifrons.
Yeah.
Right.
A 10-foot.
So, listen, if
horn helmet.
if anybody out there listening has horns from a bison latifront, hey, it'd be really cool. I would wear it. I would get a helmet and I would wear it for the podcast.
I'm gonna have to get a bigger PO box.
Yeah. You're gonna need a bigger office.
Okay. And here's Castoroides, the giant beaver. Was particularly prevalent in the southeast, but I think he was over there where you guys live too. So this was your 500-pound, 600-pound beaver.
Wow.
Don't even touch that.
Yeah.
Procoptodon. This was an Australian animal. The giant kangaroo.
What?
So, here we go. Let's not pass this up. Yeah. Arctodus simus, the giant short-faced bear. Now, you notice the long legs on this
Limbs.
brute.
Yeah.
The legs.
You would not want
Speedy.
this guy after you.
Uh-uh.
Your chances of survival would be pretty slim.
Right.
Yeah. So this was considered the apex predator of the
But
Ice
that guy
Age.
can probably move pretty fast. I mean, he looks like a dog.
He looks like
Yeah.
part dog, part cat, part bear.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this just gives you a sense of the incredible bestiary that this planet hosted up until 12 or 13,000 years ago, and that rapidly, in the geological eye blink, disappeared. But what has the dominant theory been up until recent years? Well, human overhunting.
Sure.
Brad had a spear and not a camera, and he took those guys out.
So, we're going to talk about that, but think about it. Okay, it's one thing to say they hunted the woolly mammoths to extinction, but wait a second. They hunted all 4 species of big old proboscideans to extinction, plus all these other animals that we were just seeing. How do you explain that?
Plus all the
Well-
horses. And, yeah.
Well, as I've pointed out, the flaw in that theory is, you've got roving bands of hunter-gatherers, 100 to 150 people in a band maximum, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to, and how many bands are there? Where's the evidence for all these roving bands? Where are the evidence for the millions of people it would have taken to kill all these animals? There isn't any.
Right.
No,
We can't
no.
find any Clovis people.
Right. We can find artifacts, but no people.
Right.
Which brings us to
Except for-
another interesting
except for
subject
Anzac one.
that we have to come back to.
So
which
I was
is
going to
what
ask,
Ted-
too, do you think, like, were there large people? There are all these large animals. What was the flora like? Was it all large? Were the trees massive?
I don't know if the trees were, if the flora was necessarily. I haven't studied into that to the extent that I have the fauna.
Well, let's
And-
let's discuss that. For all these megafauna to exist, what was the environment like for them, and what was the competition for animals to get that large? It means they've got to have a successful diet,
Mm-hmm.
and that means lots of smaller game to feed on, which would have had to have been abundant for them to reach that size. It raises a host of other questions.
An enormous biomass to support that many gigantic herbivores.
Yes.
And yet we're in the midst of an ice age.
Yeah.
Right.
That was the other question I had. How come when you were showing those maps of the globe where all of this land was connecting into Asia and everything, why didn't they go over there? If people could come across that bridge, how come the animals didn't go across the bridge the other way? And why aren't they found all over there? Why are they just here?
No, they are found over there. In fact, some of the densest remains of mammoths are found washing up on the shores of the Arctic Ocean by Siberia.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that.
I knew that about Siberia, but what about all these the megafauna? Were they also over there too?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for example, mammoths ranged from, unglaciated North America, both south of the ice sheet, and then up in the Yukon area and Alaska and the Bering land bridge, all the way across Europe and Asia, all the way across to the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, I mean, mammoth remains have been found in England.
Yeah, so this not only wiped them out, we always talk about it in terms of like, well, it wiped them out in North America, but it
Wiped out in Europe, all over the world. Yeah.
All over the world. Now, the question is, was it a simultaneous extinction all over the world? Maybe not. But the evidence that I've been looking at suggests that it probably was. And, we're looking at events here that once we get into exploring more specifically the nature of these events that occurred, it's likely that we're looking at a series of events. And within this series of events, there may have been a couple of spikes of enormous, extreme power, and then lesser of it. Just like if you have an earthquake, you may have precursor earthquakes leading up to the grand one. Just like when we look at major volcanic eruptions like Mount St. Helens didn't just completely all of a sudden blow its stack. Krakatoa didn't just immediately all of a sudden. It pretty much gave months of forewarning. It started rumbling. It started degassing. It started, becoming active prior to the major eruption. And then after the major eruption, you find a sort of a diminishing crescendo of aftershock type events, just like earthquakes will have aftershocks. And I think that's how we need to look at this. A lot of the critics are saying, well, we can look at the animal extinction and we see that it all didn't happen all at once, right? So therefore we can rule out impact type events. But I don't think that's really what the case here at all. I think that, yeah, we can certainly look at a protracted extinction event, maybe taking 1,000 years, without abandoning the idea of a global catastrophe or speculating as to what the trigger of that global catastrophe would have been.
Yeah, I mean, they don't think that that impact that happened killed all the the Jurassic period, or they don't think that the KT boundary happened in one night, right? That the impact did, but it took a long time.
It may have taken. Actually, though, in terms of the KT, it may have been really short.
Right, but still not that day, basically.
Not necessarily that day, but probably within a decade or less, because the consequences of that KT boundary were definitely global. And we're talking here about the 66 million year ago dinosaur extinction.
Right.
Which in a way has many interesting parallels with the Pleistocene Holocene extinction. And all of this is going to be the stuff that we explore as we begin to dissect these events and look at them under a much more detailed microscope.
So what are the hypotheses in the middle, or maybe that's what you're saying we're going to get to eventually? If you got a huge catastrophe that knocks them out suddenly from nature, and on the other end you got human hunters that wipe out millions and millions of these huge animals. What's in the middle? Some sort of disease,
Disease has been speculated.
There's just one or two other ideas out there, really.
Yeah,
and
pretty much. And as far as humans, what I would do is I would give to humans a role, but only in the latter phases. In other words, nature has wiped out the majority of these beasts, and there could be pockets of survivors that in that context could possibly be hunted to extinction.
Yeah.
And I think we should be open to that. I mean, that is a possibility. I don't completely rule out a human role in this. However, I think the human role has been vastly overstated.
Well,
now go ahead, Mike.
Well, to digress again, picking up on Snake Bro's comment, was it Kyle or was it Ross? Where are the remains of the close people? We find remains of these areas. Yeah, where we find the remains of these megafauna, but where are the remains of these Clovis people?
That's a question I've been contemplating for years now.
There are probably a lot more megafauna than there were Clovis people, for one thing.
That certainly could be. And then and if that's the case, then of course that completely mitigates against the humans.
Yeah,
I've seen estimates now of the human population of 5 to 10 million during the late Ice Age.
And there were
estimated. I've seen estimates 10 to 12 million proboscideans, right? So, I mean, how is it even possible? I mean, even if you had a 1-to-1 ratio, I mean, you're not going to be able to kill those beasts so fast that there's not going to be any, you might have a small area where you could wipe out. Yeah, you take maybe 10 square miles, 100 square miles, and you just kill off every mammoth there. But
they certainly wouldn't be eating all the meat.
No.
Right.
So what would be their incentive to just kill them all? Just kill them all.
Yeah. Right. It doesn't make sense.
No.
Yeah, especially with the cats. I mean, they're hard to find.
Right.
They're really good at not being seen.
Yeah,
Sure.
the giant.
Yeah.
I don't know about these ones that are extinct. Obviously, we don't know anything about them. But
Judging
we have
on the nature
mountain
of cats. Sorry.
Yeah, we have mountain lions around here. Never see them.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely. And they make, they have these rounds that are huge, miles and miles they'll travel.
Yeah.
These circuits or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I mean, they can be hunted and trapped and stuff, but it's not
Right.
easy.
Right.
Well, that raises the question, you know, if the megafauna did vastly outnumber the humans, and I find the 5 to 10 million number just kind of specious, you know, it's, you know, where's the evidence for 5 to 10 million people? Just, it's.
Well,
And
we can certainly come back to that because I've got some interesting papers that have been written, estimates of.
Did the megafauna wind up eating all the Clovis people?
I don't think so, Mike.
Okay.
Somewhere off the continental shelf, there's a really big canoe with lots of remains.
Okay, Megatherium americanum is the giant ground sloth, and let's put Brad in here so you can get an idea how big this guy was.
Well, he liked his belly being scratched. I tell you
Yeah.
what, he liked that.
So these guys were basically the size of modern elephants. And just one more of the incredible megafauna. The glyptodonts, which were South American, giant armadillo-like creatures.
Wow.
So we haven't even hardly touched upon the South American megafauna, but they were as prolific as the North American, and they also went extinct.
Now, if those guys are anything like our modern armadillos, then you can totally walk up to those guys and spook them. They won't even know you're there.
Right.
They got their head down in the ground.
They're blind and deaf.
Yeah, it's just you just walk right up to him, grab him by the tail.
With a big spiky tail.
Yeah, go for a ride.
Yeah.
So this is the book. I had this one when I was younger, much younger. Loved the color paintings in there by Zdeněk Burian. So this is the book, Life Before Man. And as you can see in here, it's got a lot of great paintings by this artist. Yeah, I love this book.
First time I ever saw Randall present, it was a time of Hale Bop, and he was supposed to be talking about comets and impacts, and he spent probably 45 minutes going into all these animals, and I'd never met him before. Well, I did briefly, but I was so frustrated that he took all this time on these animals. And he's so fascinated with these animals, and he had a big fascination with dinosaurs beforehand. But yeah, I've totally gotten interested also since then. But that first time I was so frustrated because he really got into these animals. But it's a whole amazing bestiary, like he says, that just disappeared. You know, that were everywhere out our front doors. Like we're talking in Canada, was ice for a mile thick. But if you were in the United States, you look out your front door, if you had a door at the time, right?
Yeah.
You got these huge animals, you know, so totally different than the ice. But, you know, and again, it's all gone. Where did they go? Yeah. What happened to them? It's a fascinating mystery, and I understand totally now why he was so enthralled with them and spent so much time introducing them to us at that time. And that was 1997.
But you wanted him to talk about comets, not.
Well, at the time, yeah, I did, but.
So now it comes out.
I was Grasshopper, you know. I guess I'm still Grasshopper.
Okay.
Well, we're
the
past,
giant Pleistocene grasshopper.
That's right.
Got a hell of a whistle.
We're just past an hour here, Randall. So just giving you a heads up.
What's happening?
We've passed an hour on the.
Oh, I thought you said you were passing out.
Oh yeah, but that's also happening. But
okay. Well, okay. So yeah, and it was me who said we should cut it off at an hour for all of those who've been blaming you guys. I will take full credit for that. Don't blame these guys. Look, look, if it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't have this podcast going on right now. Okay. I want you to get that, right? Because they're handling the technology here. And all I have to do is sit down and shoot my big mouth off and show some.
Bravo, Snake Bros.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
So I don't want to hear any more complaining about the shiny boys.
Or the Laughing Boys.
For
Let them laugh all they want.
Beavis and Butthead reincarnated.
is that what somebody said?
Oh, you're getting all angles, man.
Okay, so we'll go on a few more minutes. What the hell? Okay.
Yeah, a few more at least.
Back to the book that I quoted from earlier by Harold L. Levin, professor of geology at Washington University. In that book, he said, at the time of maximum continental glaciation, the northern hemisphere supported an abundant and varied fauna of large mammals, comparable to that which existed in Africa south of the Sahara several decades ago. The fauna included giant beavers, mammoths, mastodons, elks, most species of perissodactyls, which are hoofed animals, many even toad forms, and ground sloths. From all available evidence, most of these great beasts maintained their numbers quite well during the most severe episodes of glaciation, but experienced rapid decline and extinction in the period when the climate became milder. What might have been the cause for the extermination of these large Pleistocene mammals? Now, this is a book that came out in 82. So at this point, they were only beginning to realize the nature of the Younger-Dryas, right? If you look at it from a slightly larger perspective, right, if all these animals are going extinct around 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, it isn't during the time when, the Ice Age is ameliorating and we're getting into the much warmer Holocene. So how come when the climate is actually becoming more benign, are all these animals becoming extinct? Well, since 1982, we have a much better grasp of the Younger-Dryas, and this 1,300-year cold snap that engulfed the planet at 12,900 years ago. So we now realize that the extinction seems to be associated with these massive shifts in climate, which was not really understood back then. So going back to one more quote from Harold Levin, again, this is the book, The Earth Through Time. One might think an assemblage of beasts that had proved their stamina against the difficulties of an ice age would persist for at least as long as did the dinosaurs. Yet, widespread extermination and extinction was the dominant biological theme at the end of the Pleistocene. The cause of the extinctions is unknown. And going way back to 1802 now, let's back up a little bit. 1802, Rembrandt Peale, who is considered to be America's first naturalist scientist, right? Look him up. He's an interesting man, did some interesting work. He was involved in a number of excavations of extinct megafauna. Back in 1802, he wrote this: "How long since these animals have existed, we shall perhaps ever remain in ignorance." Well, we now, of course, know when they existed, a couple of hundred years later, but in 1802, they had no means of dating. All they knew was they were finding the remains of these animals when they were excavating, when farmers were plowing a field to put in crops, and they would dig these things up. If they're digging a canal, they would find these things, sometimes just laying right on the ground, like in the case of the Big Bone Lick on the Kentucky-Ohio border. You had huge numbers of mastodon skeletal remains sticking up out of the swampy ground. So, can you imagine the early explorers walking into this elephant graveyard, and here are these 8, 9, 10-foot rib cages sticking up out of the ground? That would be a pretty impressive find.
That would be amazing.
So then Rembrandt Peale goes on to say, certain we are that they existed in great abundance from the number of their remains which are found in America. We are likewise sure that they must have been destroyed by some sudden and powerful cause. Now, his speculations there, I think, are much more realistic than the 20th century speculations that they were hunted. I mean, the overkill hypothesis is the name usually given to the human predation, the idea that humans hunted the megafauna to extinction. Now, you could say, well, yes, they were a sudden and powerful cause, but I think when we look at all the evidence, I think we can pretty much throw that idea out, that humans were basically, struggling for their survival in the late Pleistocene world, not only against a harsh climate, but against a bestiary that would be more than happy to eat humans to extinction if they could.
Also,
so go ahead.
Like the majority of the bones that they find, they're fossilized, aren't they? Or are they actually the younger ones, like from, say?
Yeah. I mean, they're actual bones, and tusks with the ivories, that are still. In fact, a lot of the mammoth, a lot of the ivory sold on the international ivory market during the 19th century and early 20th century was woolly mammoth.
Mine, yeah.
So I mean, when you look at a lot of the fossils from much older animals, you're looking at, the collagen in the biologic material has been replaced in a lot of cases by minerals. But in the case of the Pleistocene megafauna, no, we're looking at actual bones.
Okay.
Yeah, mammoth tusk and ivory are real popular for guitar nuts and saddles.
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
No.
That's where the bone nuts are ivory? I've never.
That's not all of them. I mean, but you can buy mammoth tusk saddles and nuts.
I didn't know that.
I'm going to do that.
Can? I mean, I know there's been a ban on the trading of ivory.
Oh, elephant ivory.
Yeah,
but not fossilized ivory.
Not ancient ivory.
Well, I mean, the thing is that some of the mammoth ivory is almost indistinguishable. I think that's included. I mean, I think the ban is on all ivory. Maybe if somebody listening knows, I haven't really.
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about ivory. When I say ivory, I mean, generally speaking, we're talking about bone as well.
No,
bone
okay.
Nuts. Bone nuts.
Yeah, bone. Okay.
Yep.
So, in regards to the question about what happened to the Clovis, while not shedding any light on that mystery, Rembrandt Peale goes on in his comments to sort of address that when he says this: is that it is extremely probable that whenever and by whatever means the extirpation of this tremendous race of animals was effected, the same cause must have operated in the destruction of all those inhabitants from whom we might have received some satisfactory account of them.
Yeah.
And then in 1876, Alfred Russell Wallace, who was one of the co-developers of the ideas of evolution, along with, if you look up the origins of evolutionary theory, you'll see that alongside of Charles Darwin is Alfred Russell Wallace. And he wrote a book that was published in 1876 entitled The Geographical Distribution of Animals. And this was in volume 1 of a multi-volume set. And this is what he said. And I think, again, he's looking for something that to me is almost more realistic than some of the ideas and theories that came along in the 20th century. Quote, "We live in a zoologically impoverished world, from which all the hugest and fiercest and strangest forms have recently disappeared. Yet it is surely a marvelous fact, and one that has hardly been sufficiently dwelt upon, this sudden dying out of so many large mammalia, not in one place only, but over half the land surface of the globe. There must have been some physical cause for this great change, and it must have been a cause capable of acting almost simultaneously over large portions of the Earth's surface." Mm-hmm. And then William Buckland, one of the godfathers of modern geology, along with Cuvier and Agassiz and about a half a dozen other prominent early scientists and naturalists. He was looking at the remains and in the context, the geological context in which the late Pleistocene megafaunal remains were being found. What did he find? He found that they were mostly found in gravel pits, in loam, in peat bogs, and so on. Now, how do you get an extensive, large deposit of gravel?
Water.
Flood.
Water. Exactly. That's right. Now, William Buckland said this in 1823. How is it possible to explain the general dispersion of all these remains, but by admitting that the elephants, as well as all the other creatures whose bones are buried with them, were the antediluvian inhabitants of the extensive tracts of country over which we have been tracing them, and that they were all destroyed together by the waters of the same inundation which produced the deposits of loam and gravel in which they are now embedded. Yeah. See, I think a lot of these older guys back then
They got
had
it.
I think we'll end with one more quote from Charles Darwin, and then we'll pick it up in our next episode. This was in his 1871 in his Journal of Researches into the Natural History and Geology of the countries visited during the voyage of HMS Beagle round the world under the command of Captain Fitzroy, Royal Navy. All right, this is what he said. What then has exterminated so many species and whole genera? The mind is at first irresistibly hurried into belief of some great catastrophe. But thus to destroy animals, both large and small, in southern Patagonia, in Brazil, on the Cordillera of Peru, in North America up to Bering Straits, we must shake up the entire framework of the globe. In the end, he couldn't accept that. That was just too much for him because he couldn't imagine, how do you shake up the whole framework of the globe? So it's an interesting conundrum, and we're going to pick up the thread of these ideas, and we're going to talk about the Clovis. We're going to talk about the great climate changes and possibly the trigger. What was that sudden and powerful impulse that Rembrandt Peale was invoking to try to explain this? What is it that could shake the framework of the globe? What power could do that? So these are going to be some of the questions that we explore further. So stick with us, folks.
Superb.
And help us out. Help us put this thing up to the next level.
I also wanted to point out on the overhunting thing, it seems a bit outdated to me now, because you've probably read more. I'm sure you read more papers on this than I have. I've read a few, and I read a bunch of articles about it. But they're always trying to point out that the arrival of humans on the scene in North America coincides very closely with the death of all these animals, and that's how they're trying to make the correlation. But now, that's a Clovis First idea.
Yeah.
Now,
yes.
Yeah. So I think it's
that's a very good point, Russ. I mean, because if we accept this idea that there was these hordes of hunters that swept across the Bering land bridge down through the ice-free corridor, slaughtering every animal in their pathway, right? And because these animals were so naive when it came to humans, that they just stood there like Dumbo and got speared to death. Well, obviously your point is that if this new evidence is emerging that Clovis was later, that there were earlier.
Right. There are people
15, 20,000 years ago. Yeah. Or older. Yeah. Well, then that idea pretty much collapses.
Right. Their main correlation of arrival of humans and these animals all die falls apart. And after that, there's almost no evidence for overhunting. So that was my point.
Yes. And it's a good point.
Thank you.
Russ, you get an attaboy for that.
All right. Sweet.
Good job, bro.
All right. Well, on that note, we should end the show since I just did something totally awesome.
Congratulations.
Timely.
Yeah. All right. Everybody can get a hold of us. Kosmographia with a K, Kosmographia011.2 at gmail.com. send us emails. I know we've gotten a bunch that are in the backlog. We're going to start looking at those. By the time you hear this, we will have looked at all of them. So you can also support the show. We have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Randall Carlson. All that money goes directly into Randall's wallet, straight into it. So the more support we have there, the fatter his wallet gets and the more chance we will have to
learn more.
That's right.
Yes. Well, with that money, I will be able to fund the lifestyle to which I aspire.
And there are quite a few new Patreons, so much appreciated. And
yes,
there are perks that come along with that, and more in the development. But
we've got some good ideas for juicy little perks.
Absolutely,
it's going to be coming up. Yep.
Cool.
The
Website.
simplest one is early access to some of the videos of the podcast as they come out. But yeah, there's more deeper level things coming through that you'll be loving.
Good deal. When are you guys going to tell us about this?
Well, we'll get around to it.
Okay. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay.
No.
Cosmographia.com for the website. Once again, Cosmographia with a K, and that is basically a blog. It's the hub for all of the podcast stuff. So that's about it. You guys get a hold of us. Email. Also, definitely check out the YouTube. Everyone should write comments on the YouTube and just really like flame Brad. That's what you should do on YouTube.
Overwhelm him.
Just completely overwhelm him so that he stops trying to curate them.
Just don't curse, because all the cursings go into an automatic folder that segments them off.
Deleted.
Keep it clean, folks.
But now you can also comment on any of the shows on the blog, on the website, Kosmographia.com. So if you want to write more longer, more involved, but still public comments, that's a good place to do it as well. So.
Oh yeah.
I've got a teenage niece, so don't send anything that would be unacceptable for my teenage niece to read.
Good point. All right, I think that's it, gentlemen.
Good night.
Thank you.
Great podcast as always. Have a good night.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Awesome, Randall. See ya.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.